I'm here this afternoon with Dr. David Wood from New York. Welcome to Texas. Delighted to have you here. I've enjoyed listening to you last night and on the radio program today. You've covered a lot of topics, so I'm going to encourage my audience to catch those other videos as well, because, boy, you've touched on and have shared a wealth of information. A couple of areas, though, that come to mind that I would like for you to touch on. One of the things in our community out in West Texas, San Angelo, Texas, as is happening throughout the nation, is this interfaith movement. And a lot of Christian pastors are literally being pulled into it, not fully understanding the Islamic purpose behind it. Can you kind of pick up with that and kind of okay, I can't say that word today, elaborate on that particular topic and what you see going on in that particular realm?
Yeah, well, there are certain Muslim leaders who are taking advantage of something that's going on, namely that there are people who would love to have interfaith dialogue. Two faiths actually having a discussion. That sounds wonderful to almost everyone. That sounds wonderful to me. And if you look at the things that are going on in the world, you have terrorism, you have all kinds of problems coming from every direction, and lots of people not understanding what other groups believe or what their motivations are. And so you'd think, what better way to sort of get through some of these problems than by sitting down together and having discussions. So that's very appealing to people in the West. So there are Muslim leaders and groups like the Council on American Islamic Relations who would love to use what everyone wants to further their own agendas. And so they are happy to contact churches and say, hey, let's have some interfaith dialogues here. But what they mean by that is, let's get together and have a discussion. There will be no criticism here. You will not be allowed to raise critical questions about the Quran or Muhammad. But let's get together and talk about how Islam is actually a religion of peace, and how Christians and Muslims have so much in common that you shouldn't be complaining about Muslims. And so it's very it's fake, right? The purpose is not to actually understand one another's positions. The purpose is to keep people in a state of ignorance and to continue deceiving them. And so, I would love, and I've been in them before. I've been in interfaith dialogues, but I'm not participating in one where I'm not allowed to criticize what people's claims are and so on. So that would be my thoughts on that.
Pastors that have been pulled into it and truly believe that this is a genuine movement, and because of the Christian mindset that we need to always work peaceably with other people and things like that, what do you feel is the best way to approach pastors with the truth about what the Islamic purpose is?
Yeah, Islam has always, since the very beginning, since the time of Muhammad, done an amazing job of using people's good intentions against them. So when Muhammad was a persecuted prophet in Mecca, people in other areas of Arabia looked and saw, oh look, here's a guy who's proclaiming monotheism, and his own people are upset at him about that. What can we do to help? And they actually invited him to Medina, another city. Hey, come here and join us. We'll make you one of the leaders of Medina because we so respect you. He conquered them, right? So he used their good intentions to subjugate not only Medina, but also all of Arabia. And we have to be aware of that sort of thing. It's wonderful to have good intentions. But Jesus said, "Be wise as serpents, harmless as doves." Right? Don't be stupid here. And so, if there's a pastor who's being approached with some sort of interfaith dialogue, I'd say we need to let the pastor know what's going on here. Here's this group. Here's the background of this group. Here's other things that they've done. And here is their agenda. And so if you want to use this event somehow in order to further people's understanding of Islam, to further the understanding that Muslims have of Christianity, great, but you need to insist on certain rules that allow you to do that. And you don't want them to be able to use you and use your church and use your influence to further their own agendas. And the problem here is most pastors just aren't aware of this, right? I mean,
Right.
if you're a pastor in a church and you don't deal with Islam,
You're not focused on
yeah,
that.
you don't deal with that, and all of a sudden a Muslim group approaches you and says, "Hey, could we get together for a dialogue?" And, awesome! What better thing could we get together and do? And so they're not really aware of what's going on, and so it kind of has to be person to person, going around informing people until it becomes common knowledge what's going on. And that way, when you approach the pastor's already heard this over and over again. Very difficult once a pastor starts setting things in motion and the interfaith dialogue is next month, we've got it all set up. It's very difficult to go in there and say, they're duping you. They're tricking you. They've already got you. Because then he has to shut things down, and he doesn't want to do that. It'd be an embarrassment. So be much more effective in the long term if these things become common knowledge, so that when the group approaches the pastor to begin with, he's already aware of what's going on, and he's already in a position to say, okay, if you want an interfaith dialogue, absolutely fine. You can get anyone in the world you want from the Muslim position to come in and represent Islam in this dialogue, but we get to decide who we're going to have representing Christianity in this discussion, and no topics are off limits here. We're going to have each side can give a presentation, and then we get to raise questions and objections to those issues, and then you've got a fruitful event.
Very well said, because that's typically not the way they want it to be. Yeah.
And most groups would say no, they would refuse that.
Yeah.
Most Muslim groups would say we're not going to do that. And why? I mean, I'm a Christian. I'm willing to sit on stage, and you can challenge my beliefs. Why aren't you willing to sit on stage and have me challenge yours?
Most interesting that you said that, because back in January 31st of this year, we had the Muslim Day at the capital of Texas. And there was this little interaction that happened during that time there, where some Christians were actually challenged by an imam for such a debate. So now you come to Texas, and I understand an invitation was put out to about 14 or so imams here in San Antonio, and then others even beyond, and no one would come to have that open, honest dialogue with you. Possibly they have heard of Dr. David Wood, and your reputation, I think, probably precedes you. You're very prolific on YouTube with 600 plus, I understand, in videos, and viewership in the tens of millions. You're reaching a different audience than typically. I have found here in Texas that typically the people that are more open to a conversation about the truth between Islam and Christianity tend to have a grayer hair. But as I noticed last night, when word got out through YouTube that you were going to be here, you drew in a much younger audience, and I applaud you for that. What have you found with the work that you're doing and your honest discussions about Islam? What are you finding out there from this younger generation?
Well, the plus side of being on the internet is that, 20, 30, 40 years ago, if you wanted to learn about some topic or be informed, you might go to some sort of lecture or something like that. So an older generation is going to be more familiar with that. If they want to learn about some topic and they see that this topic is being spoken on at some time, they'll go out to that. Younger generation, if they want to raise some question, ask a question, they type it into YouTube, right? Mm-hmm. What does Islam teach about such and such? They type that into YouTube. And so in that situation, they'll find me. And so it's really the media that I'm using that's helping draw in a younger crowd.
What is the younger crowd's reaction? What are their comments under your videos? What is their reaction to what they're hearing?
It kind of depends, because there aren't a lot of voices on our side as far as speaking from positions of enormous influence. And what I mean by that is, if you think about the mainstream media, right, the main news networks, the message that young people, old people, everyone, the message they're getting from the media is a pretty consistent one, that Islam's a religion of peace, a few bad people have hijacked the religion, and so on. That's the message they get. And so you shouldn't point a finger at the religion. You shouldn't criticize the religion or Muhammad over what a few people have done to hijack the religion. So that's the message they get from the media. That's the message they get from many politicians. That's the message they get from the entire education system, from elementary school now on up all the way through college and graduate school. That's the only acceptable message. And that's the message you get from Hollywood. That's the message you get on television. That's the message that's being told to them from every direction. And so when someone comes along and says, actually, when someone commits an act of terrorism, they're doing exactly what Muhammad said, and here's why, here are the passages, that can be kind of shocking. And so some people react out of anger, because they've been taught, if you think that way, if you raise these kinds of objections, it must be because you hate Muslims and want them all dead and things like that. And so they're convinced that that's the only reason someone might say these kinds of things. And so they see you saying them, and they've been trained to react as if you must be this kind of person. Yeah. And so many of them do react that way. And so, then you challenge them on that. But lots of people aren't as, just aren't dumb, right? They're smart enough to see through this, right? When they're constantly told Islam's a religion of peace from everyone, even though they see over and over again terrorist attack after terrorist attack after terrorist attack, and they see Boko Haram rise up in Nigeria, Al-Shabaab rise up in Somalia, various groups rising up in the Middle East, including Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and so on, the Taliban in Afghanistan and Pakistan. They see all of these groups that have remarkably similar attitudes on how to deal with unbelievers, coming up from ethnically very different areas of the world, and coming to the exact same conclusions, and they just understand on some level there has to be something here. There has to be something uniting all these different movements. If it's not Islam, what else is it? It has to be Islam, and they're being constantly told it has nothing to do with Islam. And so lots of people are realizing, no, I'm being misled here, and so I need to be aware of that. And that's when they're going out and looking for answers. And so we want to be there for them when they start.
I've got to ask a question. From all of your research and experience and friends that have come out of the Islamic faith, do you believe that Islam is truly a religion?
If it depends on how you define religion. If you define a religion as a set of beliefs about God and the world from which you derive a moral code or something, I define a religion as something along those lines, then yes, I would say that Islam is a religion. I think when lots of people raise that question, they're thinking of religion as something they're thinking of it in a really Western sense, that there's a separation between church and state. Jesus said, render to Caesar what is Caesar's, render to God what is God's. He's drawing a distinction there. You have obligations to your government, and you have your obligations to God, and so on. And so I think we're thinking of a religion as something that focuses on your obligations to God and to your fellow man, but doesn't call for the overthrow of the government or something like that. We're saying, well, Islam can't be a religion because it does call for that, but in Islam there is no such division. Your religion is from God, and it calls for the violent subjugation of the entire world and the overthrow of all non-Islamic governments.
And I think that's something people don't really understand. Those what you just ended that sentence with there, that their ultimate goal is the annihilation or submission of all the other religions in the world to them, to theirs.
And I just want to be clear so that no one misunderstands. When I say that that's what Islam calls for, I'm not saying that that's what every Muslim believes or that your Muslim friend that you talk to wants to subjugate you. Plenty of Muslims who don't want to subjugate the world. They don't even know what Islam teaches. They're not wired that way. But right now we're talking about what the religion calls for, and there's no question that's what Islam calls for. Muhammad said it over and over again, and it's in the Quran, and so it'd be really stupid for us to ignore it.
So, as a matter of fact, then, really, we need Muslims or people who identify themselves as Muslim to understand what their own Quran and everything requires of them so that they can make a choice.
Absolutely. It's really sad to me when people are never put in a position to make any sort of informed decision on an issue. They're pumped full of information that's totally one-sided, and then so now decide what you want. Well, obviously you're going to decide exactly what they want you to decide if that's the only information that you're given. And so that's why it's absolutely silly to me when people say, oh, you shouldn't criticize Islam, it shows that you hate Muslims. Wait a minute, I'm the one who wants them to have balanced information here. So that they can make an informed decision. If I hated them, I wouldn't tell them, right? I'd let them, okay, go on being brainwashed your entire life. I'll just let you. I won't even give you the opportunity to think for yourself. I have no idea how it could be hateful or bigoted to say, you've been told one thing your entire life, now let's actually look at the facts, think our way through them, and get to the truth. It's like you're saying Muslims are incapable of wanting to know the truth, or they're just not equipped to deal with facts. It's like, our critics are saying things like that they claim to be supporting Muslims, but they're treating Muslims just like they're savages, like they're incapable of any sort of rational thought. And I just don't agree with them. I think Muslims are capable of rational thought. I think that they have been fed a bunch of nonsense all their lives. And I'm just there to say, hey, why don't you look through this a little more carefully and have all the facts on the table so that you can make that informed decision.
There's a tremendous outreach that is going on globally to Muslims around the world. What are you seeing? What is do you see shifting and changing? Some glimmer of hope. What do you see out there?
Well, there are lots of people who are very discouraged about reaching out to Muslims. They think, no, you just can't do it. They're not going to listen. They're too stubborn. Or they're discouraged by the amount of violence in the world, right? I mean, you look at violence against the Copts in Egypt or Christians in Pakistan. Very discouraging to think,
yes.
How can we deal with this? And it just doesn't seem like any good way. And there's lots of people who think, it's just a waste of time to try and reach Muslims. There's so many of them, and Islam is growing so rapidly and expanding. How could you ever hope to win in this battle of ideologies? And what they don't realize, we're the first generation right now. We're the first generation to have the kind of opportunities that we have. No generation of Christians for 14 centuries has had the kind of opportunities we have. And there are a couple of them. One, we're the first generation that has open access to Islam's most trusted sources. So for recently, in recent decades and even centuries, if you wanted to read the Quran, you could get a translation of the Quran in English. But Muslims believe in way more than the Quran. Yeah. They believe in these massive multi-volume collections of hadiths, which is actually where they get most of their Islamic practices from. And this is where you get the history of Muhammad. This is where you get Muhammad's background, the things that he did. You find out, the Quran only mentions Muhammad by name 4 times. So if you really want to know about Muhammad, you have to go outside the Quran. And those are sources that we just didn't have. And what that did was it allowed Muslim preachers to go into areas and to say pretty much whatever they wanted about Islam. And no one was going to be able to say, no, that's actually not right. So this allowed Muslim preachers to come into America, and if they're talking to a woman, hey, you believe in women's rights? Of course I believe in women's rights. Well, let me tell you about Muhammad, who's practically the greatest feminist of all time. I'm not exaggerating, that is exactly what they would preach. In order to win those women to Islam. If they're talking to someone on a college campus, they say, you like science, don't you? Yeah, I like science. Well, did you know that the Quran is a scientific masterpiece that contained endless scientific insights that are only being verified today? People, whoa, really? I mean, that book's that amazing? Let me convert. I live in the Bronx, and in the Bronx, and especially a little south in Harlem. In the 1960s, there was a huge movement in the African American community where Muslim preachers are going in and saying, hey, white people, they're the ones that enslave you. Christianity, that's the religion that enslaves people. Islam is the religion of racial equality and the religion that frees slaves. And they were able to do that. They were only able to preach that message, which was very effective. I mean, lots of people, very influential people,
yes.
Muhammad Ali and Malcolm X,
yeah.
Converted based on that message. And it's total nonsense. If you read the Muslim sources, which were not available to them, right? Malcolm X did not have access to Sahih al-Bukhari. Sahih al-Bukhari, their most trusted collection, was only translated in the 1990s. Sahih Muslim, their next most trusted collection, that was translated in the 1990s. All the sources that would have allowed people to know that that was complete nonsense, they weren't available. So I mean, if they had been available, then people would have raised their hand and said, what do you mean? Muhammad bought, owned, sold, and traded black African slaves. His followers institutionalized black African slavery. Muhammad said that Satan looks like a black man. I mean, if you have a dream, according to Islam, about a black woman, it's because there's a famine or plague approaching. These are the sorts of things you read in the Muslim sources. And I would bet that if Malcolm X or Muhammad Ali had been aware of these kinds of things, then they wouldn't have bought into it. And so notice we're the generation that now has access to that, so that when the Muslim preacher comes along and says, no, Muhammad was a feminist, no, Muhammad was a champion of racial equality, we can raise our hands and say, no, that's incorrect. So we're the first generation that has access to those sources, but we're also the first generation that can reach Muslims in really any area of the world, especially areas where Christian preachers could not reach them for 14 centuries. If you went there, you'd have to keep a very low profile. As soon as you started, if you had any success in preaching and people started believing, they're going to get you out of there, or they're going to chop your head off, and then they're going to go after anyone that you had been speaking to. Whereas right now, and this is something that I found out just with my former Muslim friend Nabil, we were just goofing off making a video on YouTube, and we made a video about the history of the Quran, and because every Muslim you run into today will tell you that the Quran's been perfectly preserved. Notice this is part of that. If they're only told one thing and they're never exposed to actual evidence, then they all form a certain belief, and they're told by their leaders all their lives the Quran's been perfectly preserved. They're never told, go to your sources and see what the actual case is, or look at the manuscripts and compare them. They're never told that, because if they were to do that, they would find the Quran's been changed over and over again.
Wow.
So Nabil and I noticed this, and we made a video about the history of the Quran. Muslim sources, which again weren't available until very recently, talk about entire chapters of the Quran being lost, large passages being lost, verses being lost. Muslims don't know any of this, even though it's in their sources. Their leaders aren't going to tell them, politicians aren't going to tell them, the media isn't going to tell them, the education system isn't going to tell them, Hollywood isn't going to tell them. If anyone's going to tell them, it has to be us. So we made a video telling them that, and we put this in a video, and it was about, I don't know, maybe 10 days or 2 weeks later, and I saw that the video had reached 100,000, which that's nothing spectacular, but this was early on, and we were impressed that it reached 100,000 just on us talking about the Quran. And then I clicked on YouTube Analytics, and it told me where people were watching it. And at the top was the United States, and then like the United Kingdom, and then Canada, and so on, go down the list. And I got down to 8th or 9th place, and it said 3.6% Pakistan. And I thought, 3.6% of 100,000, that's 3,600 people.
Right.
Who were looking for this, right? They're looking for information about the Quran because they found us. And now they heard the truth, which they weren't going to hear in Pakistan, and went down a couple more places, and it was something around 2.4% Saudi Arabia. I thought 2,400 people in Saudi Arabia? You could not tell this to 2,400 people in Saudi Arabia.
No.
They would either, there would be mob violence, or they would lock you up. So that's when it really hit me that we have an opportunity that no one's ever had of. Christians in the past couldn't have dreamed of having an opportunity where you can pull out your smartphone right now and tell a Muslim about Christianity, even if he lives in Saudi Arabia. You can get him on Facebook now. No one has had these opportunities. So as many discouraging things as there are going on in the world, as much as we have stacked against us, we also have some amazing blessings that can help us talk to Muslims around the world and preach the gospel to Muslims around the world, and we certainly don't want to miss these opportunities.
Yeah, that almost sounds exciting, being the first generation. What do you envision in do you envision something in the future that will be like the next step from these that are beginning to awaken to truth? Where do they get discipled?
Well, I believe we're going to see lots of Muslims leaving Islam, because I've seen lots of Muslims just in the comments section talking, telling me that they've left Islam after watching my videos or watching this or that.
That's huge.
And so on. So I'm thinking if I hear from all of these former Muslims, then what happens if there were a lot of people doing the same thing, a lot of people who are active in reaching Muslims and sharing the facts with Muslims? We're going to see, I put it this way, I believe we're going to see more Muslims come to Christ in our lifetimes than all previous generations of Christians combined.
Wow.
I think we're going to see that many Muslims come to Christ. The difficult part, as you mentioned, are things like discipleship, because some Muslims are in areas where, that's the downside of being online, right? The plus side of being online is I can share Muslims with people around, I can share information with Muslims around the world instantly. But that's very different from, your friend converting to Christianity and you're right there. Oh, now come to church with me. Oh, join me at Bible study. You're right there to kind of walk with him through this journey. Whereas when, a Muslim in Pakistan converts to Christianity, you're not there for him. And he's kind of out there on his own, and he will, want to go join a local church. But you don't know how sound that local church is, or he might be in an area where it's not safe, where there is no local church, or it's just an underground church, or there may be just a cult nearby. So these are the situations, and so it's going to have to expand in the coming years to where we have all of the information out there to reach Muslims with the gospel, all of the information out there to correct the false claims that have been given to them. But then after that, so now you've converted to Christianity, make sure you understand all of this basic Christian theology and so on. This is foundational. Make sure you understand this basic apologetics, the reasons why you believe, so that when you're challenged, you can respond. And here's an online discipleship program, and if you're in an area where you don't have a church, here's an online fellowship of believers. And it's going to have to get to that until we eventually get to the point where a Muslim in Saudi Arabia is free to convert and to leave Islam and to go join a church and so on. And hopefully we get to that situation. I don't know that we will.
But that's against the Quran. That the ultimate apostasy where death is
but they're trying to show that they're more moderate. So if they really want to show that they're more moderate in Saudi Arabia, we're going to give them the opportunity. And the bottom line is if enough people convert, it becomes a kind of irresistible force. I mean, in ancient Israel, there were lots of Jews who really didn't like Christians going around preaching. In the Roman Empire, they were persecuting them, and yet Christians took over the Roman Empire in a little over 3 centuries without shedding a drop of blood, just by preaching and people converting. So it can be done. We've seen historically that you can have a massive empire, hell-bent on stopping Christians, on killing Christians, on stopping the Christian movement, and yet Christians beat it anyway without any violence. And I would love to see the same thing in Saudi Arabia. I would love to see the same thing in Afghanistan and so on.
Yeah, That'd be great. If people want more information, what is your website, YouTube? I give them your contact info.
I have a couple websites, but the quickest way to find me would be on YouTube. If you can go in there and type in Acts 17 Apologetics, that's my channel. But if you just type in David Wood, a lot of my videos will pop up. A lot of videos of people who really don't like me and are saying some interesting things about me will also pop up, but you'll still see my channel there.
All right, well, very good. Thank you for your time. I look forward to hearing you again this evening, and God bless your ministry and keep up the great work.
All right, thanks.
Thank you.